Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well today. And in this video, I'm going to explain the automated system that receive email and classify email, generate the response to the email, and send the email back to the customer. So this project, okay, the goal for the project is to build a system that uses large language models LLMs to classify incoming email and automate the response based on the classification. I'm going to explain the pipeline and the procedure using the PowerPoint. And when I'm explaining the steps in the PowerPoint, I'm gonna go back and forth to the Python code and to talk more in details about the code and the process and the steps of the project. So the approach to the project is there are three main steps to build the system. First step is the classification module. So this classification module is a function that receive the email, the incoming email, and return the corresponding category of that email. Category of the email means it the class of the email or the classification. When the classification done on the email, it's gonna return the label for the email. And the second module is the response generation module. The input to this module is the incoming email or the received email text and the corresponding category of the email from the step one, and it generate the response email using LLM. And the third part or the third module is the automated pipeline to implement and combine the step one and the step two. So here is the diagram of the three main steps. You see at the top that input is the customer email, arrives at the comes to the automation module, and this input will be used as an input to the classification module. The output of the classification module is of course a class or the classification, and it goes to the response generation module, and the response generation module generate the response to the email, and the response goes out of the automation module. So here there are two important modules, classification and response generation. These two are the ones that they have LLM API calls, or they use LLM to do the tasks. On the left, you can see the classification module. Uh, it has three main components: prompt, LLM, and raw output. Also, the response generation module, they have three main components: prompt, LLM, and raw output. So also another thing I'm going to explain in this video is controlling LLM output and error handling. So to control the LLM output, there are different ways we can do. One way is we can control the output with the prompt, which is also called prompt engineering. So we can modify the prompt and then try to use the best prompt to get the most desirable output corresponding to the specific task. And also note that modifying the prompt does not guarantee the desired output, because LLM output is probabilities and the system is stochastic. So using the same prompt again and again does not guarantee the same output, or using the uh, prompt and requested output does not guarantee that we get the desired output. And also there is another things I'm going to explain is the verification and error handling. So for that, I'm going to explain the steps that we verify the input data. We make sure that the input email that we receive from customer has correct format. And also I'm going to explain the LLM output verification. We need to make sure that in every step that LLM has output, we check the LLM output and verify the output that we can use it further down the pipeline. And yes, these are the two uh, main thing that I'm going to cover. So here I'm going to explain the classification module. The classification module has three main components: prompt, LLM, raw output. And there are two different prompts I can use for the classification task. On the right, you can see that option one is extraction prompt, where I can explain the task at the on the top and what I want the LLM to do, and give them the email, and then ask the output format. And the output format, I can define it anyway. I can define it to be a list. I can define it to be a JSON format. I can define anyway, and the LLM tries to output, give me the output in a format that I request. Another way to do the extraction and classification is use the function calling, which I prefer. So the function calling, you can see on the right that there is a different types of prompt you need to provide to the LLM. For the function calling, you need to provide the structure prompt or in JSON format, explaining what you want from the LLM to do, and give them some details about the function that I'm going to explain more in the next slide. Classification prompt. And what is function calling? So in this uh, slide, I'm going to explain about the function calling. Note that function calling is not available for all OpenAI GPT models. It has started to be available from GPT 3.5 Turbo and further and later, and is not available for all GPT models. And what is function calling? So given the function name, description, and information about the function arguments in a structured format in a prompt, as well as user input task, LLM return the name of the function and appropriate arguments of the function to complete the user input request tasks. So it means that you provide the information about the function in a prompt. It can be one function, it can be two functions, it can be several functions. Each function you provide the information, it should be structured, and you need to provide the function name, the names of the arguments, types of the arguments, the description about these each arguments and stuff. So you just need to provide information about the function, not the function itself. So when you provide the information about the function in a prompt, and LLM trying to, and then give them the task to do or give them the input, LLM tries to return the function name that should be used to complete the task or to complete the request, as well as the arguments of the function. So the arguments of the function can be extracted from the task, or arguments of the function can be left empty, depends on what kind of specification you define in the prompt. And what are the advantages of function calling? The function calling, it's first is easy to add more thing to extract. So you can uh, define different variables to extract. You can define different things to extract from the input, not only the classification or the category of the input. And the function calling gives you the structured output. So one of the advantages of using function calling is that you are sure that you get the structured output from the LM. Of course, is not always, you cannot always sure 100% about the output of the LLM because it's probability. But the OpenAI GPT model has been trained for function calling to return the structure output, including the names of the function to be used, and the arguments of the function to be used. And also, when you provide the functions in the prompt, one or more functions, you can assign the use of the function is mandatory or not. LLM can decide by itself either to use the function or return the function name and the categories, or just answer the question or just reply, to the request by itself. So this is also another things, that you can provide in the prompt. And uh, LLM is can choose between using the returning of the function or not just return the answer or return whatever request is that by itself. Or you can also make it mandatory to use the function, or you can make it forbidden to use the functions. So you have like different options, and you have like so many flexibilities to define on the prompt. And also you can assign which function arguments are mandatory to extract or to return. So here on the right you can see that I assign the sentiment is required, sentiment variable is required. And also you can see that when I describe the sentiment argument variable, I decided that provide the enum, which is possible things that this variable can be. So when you do the classification, you need to provide the possible classes, and here you can put all possible classes that the sentiment should be one of them here. So let me see if I can show this prompt in a code. Let me see. Option. Mhm. Okay, here I'm going to explain the details of the prompt from the code. So as you can see here on the screen, this is the classify email module, and the first thing I do is create the prompt. And for the prompt I need to create the structured email information format before passing that or putting it inside the prompt. So here you can see this is the list of functions that I'm going to include in the prompt. And there is only one element, one function. And as you can see here, I uh, describe the information of this function, which is a classification function, in a structure format. As you can see, the name of the function is classification. Description of the function is classify the email sentiment with given categories. So LLM needs to see the description of the function in order to be able to use the function. So if you have one or two or three or four functions, you have to provide the description of the function, and LLM see the description of each function, and it's gonna use the appropriate function and return the appropriate function based on the description. Also, you need to give the information about the arguments of the function. Here you see on the in the properties field, I mentioned sentiment. Sentiment is the arguments of the function, and it has some features I need to describe, which is type string, description of the argument is sentiment of the email. It should be one of the given categories as I mentioned here. So you need to describe the argument variable. Each argument variable should have some descriptions. LLM need to know what's the purpose of this argument variable. What is this argument variable should be in order to decide the value or choose the value or return a value for this argument variable. And also next I mentioned enum and the list of possible values that this argument variable can be. So here I uh, decide that put all possible categories because to make sure that this argument variable sentiment is one of these categories and not anything else. This is another advantage of using function calling for classification and extraction. And next I okay, and also I mentioned required sentiment. So if you have like several arguments, function arguments, and LLM need to decide values for them. You know, some of them might LLM decide that returned empty, no values, because they're optional, and some of them are mandatory. So here I what happened? Let me see. Okay, here I decided that to provide the required arguments, which is sentiment should be required and should be returned with the value. And the next here I uh, define the message for LLM. The message role is user and content is email body. And also I'm going to explain later that how we provide the prompt and make the API call to the large language model. Now I'm going to explain the next module. The next module is the email generation prompt. Here, as you can see on the screen, process involved in prompt engineering, which are the if you- structured steps you need to take in order to make sure that you provide the best prompt for the LLM to get the desired output. As you can see as on the screen, it starts with defining the goal, craft the initial prompt, test the prompt, analyze the response, and then refine the prompt, and then iterate the process. These are the prompt engineering steps that I took to come up with the best prompt for this module. Uh, okay, and then here I'm going to explain the steps I took to choose the best prompt for this module. You can see on the right side of the screen there's a sample prompt uh, I used for this module, and the prompt specification for this module, the goal is first, given the email and its corresponding classification, LLM should generate appropriate response respectively. So we know that this is the goal for this step of the project, and the prompt should be unique. So one specific prompt for each classification category. We need to make sure we define different prompts for different classification, and because in the prompt we need to explain the situation and we might need to ask the LLM to do or return different things mm, according to the classification, the email classification we received. And I use domain expert. So I use domain specific role and terminology. For example, I started the prompt mentioning that you are a customer service agent with 10 years of experience. So this is very helpful if you want to LLM know the situation and use the domain expert terminology in your prompt. So LLM should assume that it's an expert in the field, and so is going to treat as expert and return things uh, in a way that expert in this field is going to do. So this is helpful that LLM know that in the process is not the replying or responding email to a friend or colleague, or uh, to the professors. So LLM should know the situation and the context. It's going to be a customer service email response, and it's going to be the well experienced customer service is going to do that, which is going to be very helpful uh, and very useful in prompt engineering. So also include contextual guidance and style. So in every prompt for every different classification, I mention the tone and mention what kind of information LLM should include in the response. For example, if the incoming is a complaint email, so I need to make sure that I tell the LLM that use a polite and understanding tone when generating the response, and also mention that if, for example, is inquiry, I need to make sure that tell the LLM that uh, also you need to provide that we're going to contact you later when you're creating a response for inquiry, something like that. For each situation, you need to provide the tone, you need to provide the context, and you need to provide what kind of details you LLM should include in the response. So these are the things you need to put in the prompt. And also details format of the response. I mentioned that use customer as a recipient name, and only sign the response email with customer service team. So also that LLM when generating the email or generating response, it always use the placeholders, so for us to complete. But because this is an automated system, we might need to send the response directly back to the customer without checking it. So we need to make sure LLM doesn't use placeholder. LLM mm, doesn't know random names, for the customer name. We need to make sure it uses customer for a recipient name. And also we need to make sure LLM doesn't sign the email with some random company or placeholders. We need to always and only sign the email with customer service team at the bottom. Here is the code for creating prompt for email response generation. So here you can see that this is the generate response module, and you can see that I created separate prompt for each scenario. So you see this is a complaint template that you need to uh, provide in the prompt. If the incoming email class is complaint, this is a inquiry template, this is a feedback template, and this is a support request template, and this is the other template. Other means when the class of the incoming email is none of the other above. And so I saved all of these Trump templates in template dictionary here, and again create the message for OpenAI GPT model role user and content template uh, classification. Okay, so the next is verification and error handling. So here we need to verify the input and output to the LLMs. Here you can see the input email data format verification. So there are three things I consider to make sure that incoming emails are acceptable and verified before passing to LLM and use them, to do the response generation pipeline. First, I needed to make sure uh, the input email format is dictionary. Also, make I needed to make sure that email dictionary has correct keys, because I use these keys, down in the pipeline of the project. And also, I needed to make sure that they have non-empty values, because I needed to provide the values of these incoming emails, such as email body, which is a text email from the customer. I needed to provide them in a prompt, so I needed to make sure that these are non-empty strings. The next is verification and error handling of LLM classification output. So this is the checks we need to do when we get the output from the classification module. First, I needed to check that is the OpenAI non-refusal. So is OpenAI refused to respond or is not refused to respond? Because OpenAI sometimes refuse to respond if you provide some kind of information in the prompt. And I need to make sure that OpenAI did not refuse the response. And then I need to check and verify if the output is a JSON format, because we needed to get the structured output from the LLM that has the classification of the email. And then I needed to make sure that it's one of the valid categories. So I needed to make sure that the classification I get is one of the valid categories with the exact characters. And then the next verification uh, is LLM email generation output. So for that, again, I needed to make sure that OpenAI did not refuse the response, and then I needed to make sure that there is no placeholder, in the response generated. There is no open bracket, close bracket, or curly brackets, and also I need to make sure that is non-empty message. OpenAI did not return an empty message or empty response message. And here I'm going to explain more in details about those verifications and error handlings. So first I start with to verify the input email formats before passing it to the automated response generation system. Here you can see run demonstration function here that uh, pass the emails to the system and get the output. So here it starts with first of course it starts with creating instances of the classes email processor and email automation system processor, and then you can see here process all the emails. For emails in sample emails is the list of all emails we need to test. So then we first decide to uh, choose the verified email is false. First we need to assume it's false, and if all the checks passes, then we change this variable to true, and then we're going to pass this to the system and get the output response output from the system. So here first we check that if the email is dictionary, here this line is in instance email dictionary. We need to make sure the email that we're going to analyze further has a dictionary format, and we need to make sure in this dictionary has ID as a key and body as a key, because these will be needed, down in the pipeline inside the prompt. So if these two situation passes, then we need to make sure that email body is not empty. I mean, the value of this this key should not be empty. We need to make sure that customer text is not only empty. And if all these checks passes, then we change the status of verified email variable as true. And otherwise, for each scenario, we're going to log what happens and describe what happens that we could not pass. And then here, if verified email is true, then we're going to pass the email to the system, to get the output. And here we get the result from the automation system, and we're going to save the result if the verified email is true. If it's not true, then we're going to assume the result of this email is not applicable for all fields, and we're going to save this result as the outcome of processing this email. And next, I need to this is the input data input email data format verification before passing the email data to the system. There are two other verification steps. One, check the output of the classification module or the classification call from LLM, and another is email generation. So here I'm going to first explain the steps and verifications we used to verify the classification module, the output of the classification module. Here is the classification module, describe the function. Here is a message that I defined, and then here is the API call to LLM. So here first we should try and accept, and first we try to use the API call. But if, for example, we did not provide the correct name for the model, or if the OpenAI server is down or whatever reason it didn't go through, we need to get the exception here, that error on LLM call here at the bottom. But if everything is fine, so we're going to get the response here from OpenAI API. Here we pass the message and function, we pass the function information and function call name classification. So this is the last argument we use in OpenAI API call. It means that we provide the list of the functions here that LLM can choose or can use. Is not mandatory to use them, but when we provide the function call and provide the name of the function here, it means that LLM has to use this function and consider this function and return the output to give the name of this function and the appropriate arguments of this function. So the function calling is mandatory right now because we provided here, and this function is mandatory to be used. And so the next we need to check if the LLM response has refusal or not. Here we check if the refusal is none. We need to make sure OpenAI model did not refuse to give us a response because of unappropriate stuff in the email or some other reason. If it gives us refusal, we're going to log it here and mention that refuse response by the model. So if the refusal is none, then we're going to try to extract the classification result from the response, because LLM response is a JSON format, is a structure format. It has so many different information included, number of tokens, status of different things, but we are only interested in the classification, and we need to extract the classification from this structure format. Here we're going to use JSON.loads of this response, and the response we're going to go to the function call field and arguments, and from these arguments it should be a dictionary format, in I mean a string in it, and inside is a JSON dictionary. And then we're going to load that, and then we have a dictionary here after we load it with JSON. And then we're going to extract the value for sentiment keys, which is sentiment is the function arguments that LLM decide the value for it. So we try this. If we are not successful, then we say that the mm, output of the model is not a valid JSON format. And then if this one we are successful extracting the classification from here, we're going to make sure the classification result is one of the valid categories that we define here. And if it passes, then we're going to return this classification results. So in if all of these checks are not passes, we're going to return none. So the only way we're going to return the classification is all these checks passes. Other situation, we're going to log the situation and then return none. So this is very important to know. When we return none, we're going to also record this situation later on. And the next I'm going to cover the API call for response generation, when we going to ask the model to generate the email response for us. So here is the response generation module. So here we define the message, and here again we try to get the response from the OpenAI model. And if we are not successful, if uh, OpenAI model we are providing the wrong model name, or we are uh, OpenAI is not out of service or whatever, we're going to get the exception here in the bottom. And then response is equal to self.client the chat completion create. Here we get the response, a structured response. And again, we need to make sure the response refusal is none. OpenAI did not refuse to give us response. And then we need to extract the email content, generated email content here. And then we need to check that if this generated email is empty string or not here. And we check if it's empty string or not. And if it's not empty string, then we check that if this generated email has a placeholder, because we wanted to make sure that it doesn't have a placeholder for our company name or the first for customer name, because we're going to probably reply to the customer directly. We need to make sure that this email content generated doesn't have a placeholder. So we check the check for the placeholder here. And here is the function I defined above. So the input of the function is generated email text, and we're going to see if there is open bracket and close bracket, or open curly bracket and close curly bracket in this text. And if that's true, we return false, otherwise we return true. It means that there's no placeholder. So here, if all these checks passes, then response string, response str, we're going to get that, and then we're going to return the string here. In all other situations, we return none if any of them did not pass. And for each scenario, we're going to log what happened, that we are returning none here. So this is all the checks and verifications. And lastly, here we're going to combine all the modules and all the steps and all the checks here, as you can see on the chart. From the top left, we get the input email. We verify the format of the email, is the type is dictionary, correct keys, non-empty values. And if all of this passes, we're going to pass this customer email to classification module. Then we're going to create the prompt LLM. We get the raw output. We check the raw output here. If the raw output format passes and is a correct format, we return the output. And also this input received email, if is okay email, we also pass this to the response generation module. Also, we pass the classification output of the classification module to the response generation module. With this information, we create the prompt, we pass to LLM, again raw output. We check the raw output of the response generation module, and then if all everything passes, we going to output the module and output the automated module the response email. And also the other thing I need to describe here is classification specific handling tasks module here, the small one. Let me see. Oh, sorry, let me see. From current slide, I need to I need to explain this small module. This small module, we use this module to handle the situation based on the classification. So if the output classification of the classification module is a valid output and it passes all the checks, then we use this to call the appropriate classification specific handling task module. So this module can be any module to handle the situation or do something after this situation happens. For example, if it's an inquiry, so this small module, inquiry handling module, for example, can extract the item information from the customer email. Or if it's a complaint, so this small module can extract the uh, item name, item information, and then we're going to see how many complaint we have from this item. And this small module can do anything after we get the correct classification. So but that's only thing I can kind of describe here. I did not implement any specific logic, only log the information that we check this handling a specific function based on the classification output. And here I'm going to explain combining all the steps and all the module and run the automated module. Here you see the process email. We get the email dictionary as input. So we need to also record the output of every module and then return it to print out the classification, the generated email later on. So I created the dictionary here, processing result, to store the output of different modules and return it, later on to print on the screen. So here is saving the email ID, the classification string. Here we're going to get the classification string from the classification module. And if the classification is not none, it's because you remember we do different checks on the output of the classification module. If it doesn't pass any of them, it returns none. It means that it's not a valid uh, classification. So if the classification string is not none and the classification string is in self dot response handler's key. So here is another dictionary we defined, as you can see here in email automation system class. Here, for the attribute, we define the response handlers. It has different keys and different uh, internal methods as a value. So this is the small handling module that I mentioned. Here we need to make sure the returned classification string from the classification module is one of these keys here, because we need to make sure there is no grammar, I mean there is no mm, character difference between these keys here, because it defines manually here. And the classification string that we get from the classification module, we need to make sure all these keys are the same in order to be able to call the appropriate handling internal handling function. And let me see where we are. Okay, if the classification string is not none and the classification string is one of the keys, then we're going to store the classification processing result. We're going to store this classification string as a value to be returned later. And then we're going to call the small or internal handling function based on this classification string. We have different handling function for different situation. We're going to call the appropriate one here, and then we're going to get the response email from generate response module. So you see the input is an email and the classification string. We need to get the response, and then again we're going to check the response here. You remember we have different verification checks in the response generation. If any of them doesn't pass, that module returns none. So we need to make sure if response is not none, we're going to store the status of the response, or we're going to store this response, sorry, we're going to store this response in as a response sent in processing result dictionary. And also we're going to uh, store the status of the automated system as success. So you see the success key, the value should be yes. But if the response is none, and we got the non-response from the email generation, then we're going to log the situation invalid email response message that we got from the email generation response. And then we assign none for the response sent, because we didn't send any response, and success none, the automated system uh, is not successfully completed. And also if the classification is none, or classification is not one of those keys in the response handlers, uh, self-response handlers mentioned above, then we need to have different situation here. We need to log that invalid email category, and we need to assign none to all different keys of processing result dictionary, and then we return the processing result here. And later on, these are the internal methods to handle different situation based on the classification. You see, handle feedback, handle support requests, and so on. And also these are the mock services, that these are the different functions that may needed later on, is not used in this project, that do something to connect to an external system, whatever, based on the situation. And here we're going to see the random demonstration here. If all these checks of input email format passes, then we're going to say processing email starts, and we get the result from the automated system, and then we going to append this result to uh, list of results, empty list of results that we created here. And then uh, we're going to get the data frame of the results, and then we're going to print the columns of this data frame. Here we're going to see that I run the above code, and you see the log that we get here: handle inquiry for 001, 002, blah blah blah, and these are the open air, and this is the output, pandas data frame output we get. You see the processing column 1 2 3 4 5, success is yes for all of the situation. This is a classification column, and this is a response set. And then to show it more nicely, I use the display and HTML library. Here you see the email ID 1 2 3 4 5, classification. These are the classifications, and this is the response generated by the LLM. You see that there is no open bracket, close bracket. It used dear customers in all situations. At the end of this message, it says customer service team, because I mentioned that sign it off only with customer service team, and success, yes. And thank you so much for paying attention to this description and this video.